studies have shown that children really don't recover well. We may think that they have forgotten about it, but in reality, it presents at some later point in time.
If your child is injured because of someone else's negligence, do you know where to turn for help? Well, we're going to find out right now, because that's what we're going to ask the lawyer on today's episode. Hi again, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com, and my guest is Ohio attorney Michelle Martin, who has quite a bit of experience in this area, and we're going to get to her questions in just a second. But before we do, I want to remind you, if you have questions you'd like to ask about your specific situation, go to AskTheLawyers.com, click the button at the top of the page that says Ask a Lawyer, and you can do that right there. It'll walk you through the process. But for right now, it's my turn. Michelle, thank you for making some time to answer our questions today.
Absolutely, Rob. Thank you for having me. Let's
just start a little bit about your experience. What is your experience related to minor child injury cases?
So what is my experience? Prior to becoming an attorney, I was a personal injury paralegal. In that capacity, I had the amazing opportunity of working on a gang of youth injury cases.
Right.
So basically injuries to juveniles. And they're a special subset of injured victims, because not only are we taking into consideration their vulnerabilities, the fact that they still have to grow, and when you're growing through an injury, of course that may change how your growth process. So not only is it special for that reason, but you also have what's called probate court. And in probate court, of course, you're dealing with the probate court. It's allowing you to settle the case, allowing you to disperse the case in the protection of the child. And so as a paralegal, I began to do a lot of the paperwork to make sure that we dotted our I's and crossed our T's, because with a juvenile case, unlike a normal personal injury case, there's a lot more red tape that you have to go through, because you have to make sure that this child is protected, that whatever the injury suffered is fully healed, and that you're able to get them the proper compensation for that, and that compensation is put up appropriately so that child's money doesn't go to waste. And so as a paralegal within that capacity, that's what got me started in juvenile law. And so moving into being an attorney is where I began to develop it even more.
Can you touch on what some of the more common injuries that may happen that children could experience, maybe so parents can be extra careful in some of these situations? What are some areas we need to watch for?
Right, lots of premises liability cases. So if your child is maybe at an apartment complex, playing around the apartment complex, I've had a couple cases where kids have fallen from faulty railing, and children, of course, are not thinking about the safety they're in or the risks associated.
Sure.
They're playing all over it. And so a lot of the times I have injuries for children that have fallen from balconies. I've had children who have fallen, who have received injuries while riding their bike in the parking lot of their own, either their home or a neighbor's home, like apartment complexes where, they don't properly maintain the parking lots. And so they have certain structures that are broken or dilapidated that can cause a substantial risk of harm to children. And we may say, oh, well, she just fell while riding her bike. But depending on the significance of the injury and how she fell, there could be liability there as well. And the most common injuries that I've seen, of course, are related to the children who are in the car with their parents or with another person, and they receive injuries related to a car accident or a motor vehicle accident. Lots of times those injuries may go overlooked by children or by parents of the children, because children aren't really complainers in relation to the injury they suffer from motor vehicle accidents. Sometimes they're not even aware of the significance of the injuries.
That kind of leads me to my next question. You touched on it a little bit, but as an attorney who's handling a child injury, what are some things that are different about that as opposed to handling an adult injury for you?
You have to talk to children a little different, of course, because sometimes they don't know how to explain or describe the pain that they're experiencing. They're not as well versed in terms of explaining if they're having some type of mental anguish or a discomfort. You also have to have a good rapport with the parent, because you have to tell the parent what to look for. So, look for night terrors. Pay attention to if your child is waking up, maybe they're losing their faculties at night where they didn't before. Maybe they are, acting out in school. Maybe there are just different behavioral changes that you have to pay attention to and be aware of outside of those physical injuries that, of course, you have to try to dig into to figure out what's going on with children. So there are certain little special ways that I like to talk to kids. My guardian ad litem experience has given me what I like to say the authority or the ability to speak to kids in their language and figure out what's really going on with them. And then you also attend doctor's visits and things like that with them, because you're able to speak with the doctors and be sophisticated, and you know what to look for based on the complaints that the child has made.
If you whether it's a settlement or a judgment, and you get a recovery of money for a minor child, how is that handled? What happens to that money to make sure it goes to the child?
Right. So in Ohio, when we settle a case for a child, everything has to go through the probate court. So you would file an application with the probate court to settle the minor's claim. Once the probate court receives all the documents necessary to determine whether or not the settlement is appropriate, you also have to file the distribution, and the court has to approve how the monies are going to be distributed. And in that distribution, for the children that I work with, we either do a special, we'll do a special needs trust sometimes, we'll do different other types of trusts, and or we'll do a structure.
Because I imagine for some children, depending on how catastrophic the injury is, this is something that could affect their entire life, which could be a very long span.
Absolutely. And for children, I like to make the argument that it will, because depending on the severity of the injury, studies have shown that children really don't recover well. We may think that they have forgotten about it, but in reality, it presents at some later point in time. And so if you're not knowledgeable enough to pay attention to what a child is not saying, or to make sure that you get a mental health assessment following any type of traumatic event, then you could be missing out on how this is truly affecting the child. And you're doing them a misjustice, because you're missing out on future treatment that they're going to need. And so when you're setting up those trusts and you're setting up those structures, you're making sure to put in the reserves to get the child the future treatment that they're going to need.
That's a really great point. What's your advice then for parents who are trying to pick a lawyer to help them at their minor child injury case? What advice do you have for them when it comes to pick somebody?
Go to the websites and see. I mean, it's always been on my website that I practice juvenile law, and I make a lot of times I see attorneys who may dibble and dabble in juvenile law, and they think this is kind of an area where you're trying to figure out what do you want to do, or maybe you want to practice how to be a civil litigator and you want to learn how to do that within the juvenile arena. But when you really start to break apart the nuances that is juvenile law, it's really fascinating, because you're dealing with our most precious people. Right? We're dealing with, the most vulnerable people in our community that have the smallest voices. So you really want to do your research, and you can even Google, the lawyer, and see if they advertise for juvenile law, or if they've had any cases, monumental cases that involve juveniles. And so you'll want to see, how will my case or how will my child's case be handled as it relates to this specific attorney. You want to do your research. It's
obvious your expertise and your experience in this area is very valuable, and a fascinating conversation. Michelle, thank you for making some time to help us out today.
Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate the time.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been Ohio attorney Michelle Martin. I want to remind you, if you want to ask questions about your specific situation, go to AskTheLawyers.com. Click the button at the top of the screen that says Ask a Lawyer, and you can do that right there. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Rosenthal with Ask the Lawyers.